Christmas morning, 1976. You tear through the wrapping paper so fast your mom barely gets the Polaroid up in time, and underneath all that paper is a box you have been dreaming about since you saw the commercial on a Saturday morning 2 months ago. You knew exactly what it was before you even finished ripping. That feeling, that rush, that was the magic of 1970s toys. They were loud, they were plastic, some of them broke before New Year's, and you loved every single one. Number 17 on this list was pulled off shelves after kids figured out the hard way what happens when two acrylic balls collide at full speed. And number 9 started as a joke, sold millions, and did absolutely nothing. So hit subscribe, because here are 30 toy brands from the 1970s that shaped every childhood in America. Number 30. Tonka. If you had a Tonka truck, you dragged it through the yard, loaded it with dirt, crashed it into the curb, and the thing still looked ready for more. These were pressed steel, not plastic. The dump truck weighed more than most of your other toys combined. You could stand on one and it held. Your neighbor's kid drove his over the side of a porch and it bounced off the concrete without a dent. Tonka trucks survived everything a kid could throw at them, and most of them outlasted the childhoods they were built for. Your dad probably still has one in the garage somewhere, and if you pulled it out right now, the bed would still tilt and the wheels would still roll. They do not build anything like that anymore. Number 29. Weebles. Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. That jingle lived in your head for years, and it never left. These little egg-shaped figures had weighted bottoms, so no matter how hard you pushed them, they rocked right back up. Hasbro built an entire world around them. There was a Weeble treehouse, a Weeble camper, a Weeble haunted house, all scaled to fit those stubby little characters. You could not knock them over, and believe me, you tried. You flicked them off the table, threw them down the hallway, set up elaborate obstacle courses across the kitchen floor, and launched them with rubber bands. They just wobbled and stared back at you with those painted-on smiles, completely unbothered. The frustration of owning a toy that absolutely refused to stay down was somehow half the entertainment. Number 28. Big Wheel. The big wheel was the first taste of speed most kids ever got. That oversized front wheel, that low-slung plastic seat, the handbrake that did almost nothing. You pedaled down the driveway, yanked the brake, and skidded sideways across the concrete, leaving a black streak behind you. The sound of that plastic wheel grinding on asphalt was unmistakable, and every parent on the street could hear it from inside the house. Mark's Toys made them, and they sold millions. The front tire wore down to a flat spot within a few months, and by the time you outgrew yours, the seat was cracked and the wheel was bald. But you rode that thing until your knees hit the handlebars, and then you rode it some more. Number 27. Lite-Brite. You pressed little colored pegs into a black board, put a light bulb behind it, turned off the lights in your room, and suddenly, you were an artist. Hasbro sold this thing with pattern sheets you could follow, but most kids threw those away within a week and made their own designs. The pegs ended up everywhere. In the carpet, between the couch cushions, under your bare feet at 2 in the morning. Your parents were still finding them behind the radiator years after the toy itself was gone. But in a dark room, with that warm glow coming through the board, your clown face or your spaceship or whatever you made actually looked like something worth keeping. It felt like you had made something real. Number 26. Evel Knievel Stunt Cycle. Ideal made this one, and it was one of the most exciting toys on any shelf in the 1970s. A little plastic motorcycle with a figure of Evel Knievel in his white jumpsuit mounted on top, attached to a gyroscope launcher that you cranked by hand. You set up a ramp at the end of the hallway, cranked the launcher until the rear wheel was screaming, and let it go. The motorcycle shot across the floor, hit the ramp, launched into the air, and crashed into whatever was in its path. The kitchen table leg, the family dog, your sister's dollhouse. The real Evel Knievel was on television jumping over buses and canyons every other weekend, and you were recreating the whole spectacle right there on the living room carpet. Number 25. Shrinky Dinks. You colored a thin plastic sheet with markers, put it in the oven, watched it through the glass door, and in about a minute the whole thing curled up, twisted around, and flattened back out at a fraction of its original size, thicker and harder than before. The first time you saw it happen, you thought something went wrong. But then you pulled out this tiny, solid version of what you drew, and it felt like actual magic. Kids made keychains, ornaments, little figures to trade at school. Your mom let you use the kitchen oven unsupervised, which in the 1970s was apparently fine. Nobody worried. You were making art with heat and polystyrene and everyone was happy. Number 24. Fisher-Price. Fisher-Price owned your early childhood, and there is a good chance it was the very first brand name you ever recognized. The chatter telephone with those googly eyes that rolled back and forth when you pulled it across the floor on its string. The little red barn with doors that mooed when you opened them. The record player that actually played tiny plastic records, each one a different nursery rhyme. These were not complicated toys. They were chunky, colorful, built out of wood and thick plastic, and engineered to survive a toddler who used them as hammers. The Little People figures were small enough to lose between couch cushions and big enough that you were not supposed to choke on them. Every doctor's office waiting room in America had at least one Fisher-Price toy in the corner, sticky from 100 different kids and missing a wheel, but still working perfectly. Your very first memory of playing with anything might be a Fisher-Price toy. You probably could not name it if someone asked, but you would recognize it instantly the second you saw one again. That barn door sound, that clicking telephone pull, those round-headed little people standing in rows inside their plastic house waiting for you to come back. Fisher-Price did not make toys that broke on the first day. They made toys that survived you, survived your younger sibling, got donated to a church sale, ended up in another family's living room, and kept working the entire time. Your parents gave them away when you outgrew them, and whoever got them next wore them down a little more and passed them along again. Decades later, people find those same toys in attic boxes and thrift stores, and the wheels still turn and the doors still open. Some things survive everything. Number 23. Mego. Before Kenner landed the Star Wars license and changed everything, Mego was the action figure company in America. They made 8-inch figures of superheroes, Planet of the Apes characters, and Star Trek crew members, all with real fabric outfits and removable accessories. If you had a Mego Superman, you remember the cape was a separate piece of cloth that tied around his neck and the joints bent in ways no real human ever could. Mego famously passed on Star Wars when the deal was offered, one of the biggest licensing mistakes in toy history. The company never recovered from it. But for a few golden years in the mid-1970s, Mego figures were the standard every other company measured itself against. Number 22. Silly Putty. It came in a plastic egg. You pulled it, you stretched it, you bounced it off the floor, and if you pressed it flat onto a newspaper comic strip, it copied the ink right off the page in reverse. That was the entire selling point, and somehow it was enough to keep you busy for an hour. There was no game, no goal, no instruction sheet. You just squished it in your hands until it got warm and soft, rolled it into a ball, and bounced it off the wall. And then one afternoon, you left it sitting on the couch cushion and it melted into the fabric, and your mom reminded you about that for the rest of the summer. Number 21. Hot Wheels. Mattel launched Hot Wheels in 1968, but the 1970s is when they truly exploded into every household in America. The orange plastic track snapped together in sections. The loop-the-loop defied gravity if you got the angle right. The gravity-fed launcher sent cars screaming down a ramp at a speed that seemed impossible for something small enough to fit in your pocket. You lined up 20 cars at the top of the track and let them fly one after another, watching each one take the loop and either make it clean or fly off the side and disappear under the couch. The Redline series, named for the thin red stripe painted on the tires, became serious collector's items decades later. But back then, they were cheap and disposable. You traded them at school, lost half of them in the yard, and your dog chewed the paint off at least one. Number 20. Viewmaster. You held it up to the light, looked through the two eyepieces, and clicked the lever on the right side. Each click brought a new three-dimensional image mounted on a thin cardboard reel. There were reels for everything. The Grand Canyon, Disneyland, Charlie Brown Christmas, the solar system. It was not a toy, not exactly. It was more like a tiny personal cinema you held in your hands. The images had a depth and color to them that flat photographs never matched. You could sit on the back porch on a rainy afternoon and visit places you had never been, one click at a time, and for a few seconds each image felt like a window into somewhere real. Number 19. Stretch Armstrong. Kenner released Stretch Armstrong in 1976, and the concept was almost stupidly simple. A blonde, muscular action figure about 15 inches tall, filled with a thick gel made from corn syrup. You grabbed one arm, your friend grabbed the other, and you pulled. The thing stretched to 4 or 5 times its original length and then slowly, almost magically, returned to its normal shape when you let go. That was the toy, the entire toy. There was no game, no story, no accessories. You just stretched him, and kids went absolutely wild for it. The problem was durability. Sooner or later, and it was usually sooner, the latex skin developed a tear and that thick, golden, impossibly sticky gel started oozing out. It got on the carpet, it got on the couch, it got in your hair, on the dog, between the floorboards. You tried to patch the hole with electrical tape, but once Stretch was punctured, he was finished. Your parents were not thrilled about any of it. But the moment when you and your buddy stood on opposite sides of the living room, each pulling an arm with everything you had, feet planted, leaning back, just to see how far he could go before something finally gave out, that was worth every minute of the cleanup and every stern word that came after. Kenner eventually discontinued the original line, and finding an intact one today is nearly impossible because almost none of them survived without a puncture. But for a few years in the late 1970s, Stretch Armstrong was on every toy aisle end cap in America, and every kid who saw that commercial, the one where 2 boys stretched him across the entire screen, wanted one under the tree. Number 18. Operation. Milton Bradley made a board game out of surgery, and every kid in the 1970s played it at least once. You used a pair of metal tweezers to pull tiny white plastic body parts out of cavities in a cartoon man named Cavity Sam without touching the metal edges. If your hand slipped and you hit the side, a buzzer went off and Sam's nose lit up bright red. The water on the knee, the funny bone, the Charlie horse, the broken heart. You held your breath, steadied your hand, went in slowly, and still hit the edge almost every time. That buzzer sounded like failure itself, loud enough to make you flinch, and it never got less startling no matter how many rounds you played. Number 17. Clackers. 2 heavy acrylic balls connected by a string with a ring handle in the middle. You held the ring, swung the balls up and down, and once you got the rhythm right, they clacked together above and below your hand in a steady, violent beat. The noise was incredible. The balls moved fast enough to blur, and when one of them cracked, which happened far more often than the manufacturer probably expected, sharp shards of hard acrylic went flying in every direction. Kids ended up with bruised wrists, swollen knuckles, and black eyes. They were pulled from many store shelves over safety concerns in the early 1970s, but for one brief window before that happened, every schoolyard and playground in America sounded like a drum line. Number 16. Simon. Milton Bradley released Simon in 1978, and it was ahead of its time. A round, dome-shaped plastic disc about the size of a dinner plate with 4 colored panels: red, blue, green, yellow. Each panel lit up and played a distinct electronic tone. The game played a pattern, one light at a time. You repeated it by pressing the panels in the same order. Then it added one more note. You repeated that. It kept going, getting faster, adding more, until you finally messed up, and you always messed up eventually. Simon tested your memory and your patience in equal measure, and it had a way of making you genuinely furious at a plastic disc. Those 4 tones are still rattling around in your head right now. Number 15. Slinky. The Slinky had been around since the 1940s, but it was still everywhere in the 1970s, and it still fascinated every kid who touched one. You set it on the top step of the staircase, tipped the top coil forward, and watched it walk itself down one step at a time, coil over coil, all the way to the bottom. When it worked, it was mesmerizing. When it tangled, which happened about every third attempt, it was ruined forever. No amount of patient, careful untangling ever brought a kinked Slinky back to its original form. You tried. Your dad tried. It went in the trash and you asked for another one. James Industries sold hundreds of millions of them, and a fair portion ended up as permanently twisted metal coils at the bottom of a toy box. Number 14. Easy Bake Oven. Kenner put a light bulb inside a metal box, painted it in bright colors, called it an oven, and kids lined up to use it. You mixed a tiny packet of powder with a few drops of water, poured the batter into a miniature pan the size of a playing card, slid it through the slot in the side, and waited while a single 100-watt incandescent bulb slowly baked it from above. What came out the other side looked vaguely like a dessert and tasted like warm, slightly sweet cardboard. Nobody cared. The point was never the food. The point was that you made it yourself in your own bedroom without permission to use the real kitchen. The mixes came in little foil packets with names like chocolate cake, brownies, and cookies, and you followed the instructions on the back of the box like you were running a proper bakery on a Saturday afternoon. The cookies were the size of quarters. The cakes were barely thicker than crackers. The brownies had the texture of construction paper, but the pride was completely real. You arranged those tiny creations on a plate, carried them out to the living room, served them to your family, and everyone took a bite and said they were delicious. They were lying. Every one of them. But it did not matter because you had baked something with a light bulb, and that made you feel 10 feet tall. Kenner sold millions of Easy Bake Ovens through the 1970s, and somewhere in America right now, someone is telling their grandchild about the afternoon they learned to bake with nothing but a bulb and a box of powder. Number 13. G.I. Joe Adventure Team. Hasbro reinvented G.I. Joe for the 1970s. The original military figure was fading after the anti-war sentiment of the Vietnam era, so they pivoted and turned him into a globe-trotting adventurer. Kung fu grip hands, flocked hair, and a full beard, a whole line of vehicles and themed playsets. You could send G.I. Joe into the jungle, the Arctic, the ocean floor. He came with a dog, a Jeep with a working winch, and a look on his face that said he had seen things you were too young to understand. The Adventure Team era gave G.I. Joe a second life and a whole new identity, years before he shrank down to the smaller 3 3/4-inch figures of the 1980s. Number 12. Spirograph. Spirograph was a set of plastic gears, rings, and wheels. You pinned a large ring to a sheet of paper with pushpins, placed a smaller toothed gear inside it, stuck the tip of a ballpoint pen through one of the tiny holes, and traced. Out came these perfect, intricate, symmetrical geometric patterns that looked like something a mathematician would frame and hang on a wall. You felt like a genius even though the gears were doing all the work. The problem was the pins. They slipped on smooth surfaces. The paper shifted mid-design. One small wobble of your hand, and the entire pattern was ruined with a stray line cutting through the middle. But when everything held and a flawless design appeared, you stared at what you made and could not believe a toy did that. Number 11. Hungry, Hungry Hippos. 4 brightly colored plastic hippos arranged around a shallow bowl, a handful of white marbles in the center, and pure, unfiltered chaos the second someone said, "Go." You slapped your hippo's tail lever as fast as your hand could move, launching the hippo's head forward to gobble up more marbles than anyone else at the table. There was no strategy involved. There was no skill to develop. You just pounded the lever with your open palm until it was red and sore, and every marble was gone. The noise was staggering. 4 kids simultaneously hammering plastic hippos on a wooden kitchen table at full speed sounded like a construction crew tearing out a wall. Parents heard that racket from 2 rooms away and knew exactly what was happening, exactly who started it, and exactly how many more minutes of patience they had left. Number 10. Rock'em Sock'em Robots. 2 plastic robots standing in a miniature boxing ring, one red, one blue. You sat across from your opponent, gripped the joystick controls on your side, maneuvered your fighter left and right, and threw punches by jabbing the thumb buttons as fast as you could. When you landed the right combination at the right angle, the other robot's head popped straight up off its shoulders with a loud, deeply satisfying click, and the round was over. You pushed the head back down, reset both fighters to center, and went again immediately. The television commercials were legendary. Two kids screaming at each other across the ring, fists flying, heads popping, pure competitive joy. It was organized violence for children, packaged in bright plastic, and it was absolutely glorious. Number 9. Pet Rock. In 1975, a man named Gary Dahl sat in a bar in Los Gatos, California, listened to his friends complain about their pets, and came up with what might be the most absurd consumer product in American history. He found smooth stones from a beach in Mexico, placed each one inside a custom cardboard carrying case complete with air holes punched in the sides and a little nest of straw for the rock to sit on, and then wrote an instruction manual. The manual was the real product. It included commands like sit, stay, roll over, and attack. Sit and stay, the manual noted, required no training at all. He sold them for about $4 each. It was a rock. It had no moving parts. It did not make noise. It did not light up. It did nothing, and America could not stop buying them. Pet rocks sold by the millions during the 1975 holiday season. Dahl reportedly became a millionaire within months. The fad burned out almost as fast as it started, gone before spring, but for one brief and deeply strange moment in American culture, the hottest toy in the country was a stone sitting on straw inside a cardboard box. No battery, no assembly, no skill required. You bought it, you laughed, you showed it to your friends, you set it on a shelf, and a week later, you forgot about it. But the fact that it existed at all, that someone convinced millions of adults and children to buy a rock with a straight face and a clever instruction booklet, tells you something about the 1970s that no history textbook ever captures. If the pitch was good enough, anything could sell. Number 8. Mousetrap. This was a board game where you spent most of your time building a Rube Goldberg contraption piece by piece as you moved around the board. A boot kicked a bucket, a ball rolled down a zigzag chute, a diver jumped off a platform into a wash tub, and at the very end a cage dropped down onto a plastic mouse. Nobody actually played the game by the printed rules. You just built the entire trap as fast as you could, set a mouse underneath the cage spot, triggered the chain reaction, and watched it work. Or more often, watched it jam halfway through because the ball got stuck on the chute. Then you fixed it and triggered it again. The satisfaction of watching every single piece work in sequence, from boot to cage, was worth every minute of assembly and every failed attempt. Number 7. Nerf. Parker Brothers introduced the Nerf ball in 1969, but the 1970s turned it into a household name that every kid in the country recognized. The original was just a round, dense foam ball you could throw as hard as you wanted indoors without breaking a lamp or a window. That was the whole pitch, and parents everywhere loved the idea. Then came the Nerf football in the mid-1970s, with that pointed aerodynamic shape and the tail fin that whistled when you threw a tight spiral across the backyard. Suddenly, every living room and every front lawn in America had a Nerf ball bouncing around somewhere. Nerf proved that sometimes the simplest product idea, a ball that does not break things, is the best one. Number 6. Sea monkeys. The ads in the back of comic books showed a family of tiny humanoid creatures wearing little golden crowns, smiling at you from their underwater kingdom, waving with tiny hands. What you actually got when your mail order arrived was a packet of brine shrimp eggs, a small plastic tank, and a lot of disappointment. You poured in the water purifier, added the instant live eggs packet a day later, and waited. A few days after that, tiny specks appeared, drifting around in cloudy water, looking absolutely nothing like the royal family from the advertisement, but you watched them anyway every morning before school because you had paid for them with your own allowance money and you were going to see this through to the end. Number 5. Magna Doodle. The Magna Doodle appeared in the late 1970s and gave kids a way to draw without paper, markers, crayons, or mess. You used a magnetic pen on a flat gray screen, and the lines appeared dark and clean wherever you dragged the tip. When you were done, you slid a lever across the bottom, and the entire screen wiped blank in one smooth motion. No ink stains on your hands, no wasted paper on the floor, no arguments about coloring on the walls or the kitchen table. You drew the same house, the same car, the same stick figure family over and over because erasing the whole thing with that lever was half the fun. The Magna Doodle lived in the back seat of every station wagon and every minivan in the country, keeping kids quiet on long drives for years. Number 4. Mood Ring. The mood ring appeared in 1975 and promised to read your emotional state through a color-changing liquid crystal stone set in a metal band. Blue meant you were happy and relaxed. Black meant stressed or anxious. Green meant calm. You wore it to school and spent the entire day comparing colors with every friend at the lunch table, completely convinced the ring actually knew how you were feeling inside. It did not. It measured skin temperature, which shifted for a dozen biological reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with your emotions. But for a solid stretch of the mid-1970s, every kid and teenager in America was walking around with a piece of cheap jewelry on their finger that claimed to read their innermost secrets, and most of them believed it. Number 3. Slip and Slide. Wham-O sold a long sheet of bright yellow plastic with a garden hose attachment at one end. You rolled it out across the flattest stretch of lawn you could find, turned the water on, and threw yourself onto it face first at a full sprint. The water turned the surface slick, and you slid across the wet grass at a speed that felt dangerous because it genuinely was. Kids overshot the end of the slide and kept going, straight into the dirt, the fence post, the neighbor's flower bed. There were skinned elbows, grass-burned stomachs, and on every block at least one kid who discovered the hard way that a single rock was hiding underneath the plastic. But on a scorching July afternoon, with the sprinkler running and the whole neighborhood outside, nothing else came close. Number 2. Etch A Sketch. Ohio Arts Etch. A sketch had 2 white knobs mounted on the front of a bright red plastic frame, and inside was a glass screen coated with a fine layer of aluminum powder. You turned the left knob to draw horizontal lines. You turned the right knob for vertical. Making a smooth curve required turning both at the same time with precise, coordinated movements, and getting it right took a level of fine motor control that most kids simply did not have. So you drew a blocky house, a lopsided stick figure, your name in jagged capital letters, and then you shook the whole thing and started over. The shake was the best part. One hard shake and everything you spent 10 minutes drawing vanished into a smooth gray blank. Every kid in the 1970s owned one at some point, and nobody, not one person, ever fully mastered it. Number 1. Kenner Star Wars Figures. When Star Wars arrived in theaters in the summer of 1977, Kenner had the toy license but no product ready for shelves. So for Christmas that year, they sold something unprecedented, an empty box with a certificate inside. You mailed in the certificate, and months later, 4 small plastic action figures arrived at your door. Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Chewbacca, and R2-D2, each one 3 3/4 inches tall and barely articulated. They were simple, stiff, and nothing like the characters on screen, and they changed the entire toy industry overnight. Kenner eventually produced hundreds of figures, vehicles, and playsets over the following years. Every kid had a shoebox full of them. You staged battles on the living room carpet, froze Han Solo in the kitchen freezer, and flew the Millennium Falcon off the top bunk bed. Those small plastic figures launched a collecting culture that is still going strong today. 30 toy brands. And if you are honest with yourself, you probably owned more of them than you expected to remember. Some of these are still on shelves today. Most of them are long gone, and all of them belong to a time when a cardboard box and a little imagination were enough to fill an entire Saturday afternoon. If any of these brought back a birthday party, a rainy weekend, or a Christmas morning you had not thought about in years, drop a comment and tell us which one your family had. Share this with someone who grew up in the same era, and if you have not subscribed yet, please do. There are a lot more memories where these came from.